So at this point, you basically have your engine all torn apart, and we're going to go through the process of putting it back together. You're just basically doing everything you did before, like taking it apart, in reverse. And it should be pretty easy because since we put all the screws and bolts in the right places, all you have to do is unthread them and put them back in their proper location. Make sure when you're tightening things down, you tighten it down by hand first, thread it in with your fingers, turn it in place with the socket, and then after it's hand tightened, you can go back with the ratchet and tighten it down. And we just want to make it snug. You don't want to torque it down and make it really, really tight. So just snug enough that it doesn't move anymore. So right there would be good for me. Now that we're at the point where we want to put everything back together, the first thing we're going to be working on is putting your piston back in its location. But first, it's not necessarily going to fit down in because these piston rings are expanded. So we have to use something called a piston ring compressor, which is this guy here. I'll help you with this part, so ask for my assistance. But before you put any of those things on, you need to take all these bolts, these 5 here, that are surrounding the cylinder itself, off. That way we can fit the piston down in, it's not going to get stuck on these. So for this next step, I'll help you out with this. Like I said, we're going to put the connecting rod inside of a vise, the one preferably with the wooden jaws. Just tighten it down just a little bit, not too much. And we're going to take the ring compressor, slide it over top, and we're going to tighten it down, and I will do all this for you like I said. So basically what we did was this ring compressor takes your piston rings and pushes them in and makes them the same diameter as your piston itself. That way it fits easier down into the cylinder. Like I said, I will help you out with this part. Now that we have all these 5 bolts taken out, we're going to take our piston that's inside the ring compressor. Make sure this clip is facing to the right hand side. Slide it over top, try to line it up, and we're going to basically be pushing the piston and forcing it straight down in. So you can push it with your hands, and like I said, I'll help out with this part. If it doesn't move, you can also take something like a mallet or something of a softer material like a plastic and tap from the top to force it down in. If you do it correctly, it should be like nice and even inside the piston, or I'm sorry, the cylinder. After it's inside the cylinder, we should have this like clip facing to the right hand side. We're going to take these little bolts, wind them off with our fingers until we take the clip off. Next step, we want to install the crankshaft itself. You'll see there's a side that has a gear on it right here, and it has kind of like a flat shaft. The other side has a tapered shaft and no gear. We're going to take this side and put it inside of that hole, and be careful not to get it stuck on our connecting rod here. Now that our connecting rod is actually our crankshaft is in, and our connecting rod is like halfway around our crankshaft, we're going to push down on our piston and rotate everything so the connecting rod is down near the bottom, as you can see right here, and we can take this little clip and put it on the correct way. So you're going to slide it on and thread everything on with your fingers first before you tighten it down. Like I said before, you want to make sure that you finger tighten all of your nuts and bolts down first, and then after you get them finger tight, you can take your ratchet and tighten it up the rest of the way. After you get everything connected down here, next thing we're going to do is install our tappets, which are part of the valve train, these little top-hat things, and you have 2 of them. There's 2 little holes right here, and it's helpful if you take your engine and tilt it at an angle away from yourself. Take the tappet, push it up inside the hole. Some of them have a tendency to fall out, so like I said, it helps if you have it either at an angle or you have your engine so this part is facing straight up and vertical. So for the next step, this can kind of be like a little bit more difficult, but basically what you do is you take your camshaft, the gear facing up, and you're going to slide it into that little hole right down there at my fingertip here. You got to make sure though that you arrange it so these little lobes are facing down and away from this part here, your tappets, or else it will not go in. And you also have to arrange it so it's going to mesh up, like the teeth on here, mesh up with the teeth on your crankshaft. Just like that. Next step, we're going to take this little guy here, part of our governor system, slide it on top. After you have all of your internals inside of your engine and taken care of, you're going to take the plate, the cover plate, lay it right on top. Make sure everything lines up. You might have to wiggle it a little bit, and it should snap in place to where you see the seam of the case is nice and even and flush. And you take off your bolts, put them in the original location, and tighten them down. So the next thing we're going to be doing is attaching our cylinder head to the top of the cylinder along with our head gasket too. Flip over the cylinder head, take your head gasket, match everything up so it looks just like this, nice and perfect, lined up. Hold it together, flip it over, and usually I like to put 2 bolts in the back to hold everything together. One at the top, push it through the other side, and one at the bottom. Then the next part, kind of tricky, take it, and you want to line it up with the top of your cylinder. Don't push the whole way, thread everything in by hand. And then once you get 2 bolts started, don't tighten everything down the whole way. You're going to go around and put the rest of them in and just hand tighten them down temporarily until we can get everything in its place. And then we'll go through, tighten everything down to its specifications. So for the final step for the cylinder head, you're going to be using a torque wrench. So the torque wrench is a device meant for tightening something down to a specific tightness. So make sure you refer back to the video we watched in class. But basically the number you're looking for on this turn dial is 110 inch-pounds. So you'll turn your dial until you get to 110 inch-pounds. Make sure you loosen up this knob at the end if you need to. So we're going to go to 110. And once we're at 110, we'll tighten down the knob at the end. Make sure this lever is switched over to the right. And then we're going to put our proper size socket on the end, and we're going to tighten this down. So it's important for this part to really have a partner to hold your engine still. And what you'll be doing is you're going to tighten down your torque wrench until you feel it physically like click. So let's tighten it down and see if we can hear that click. So I'll do this one, move on to the next one. Right there, not sure if you can hear it, but it's clicking. That's basically the perfect tightness, so 110 inch-pounds. And we want to do that to all of our cylinder head bolts. Next thing we're going to be focusing on is putting the gas tank back and carburetor assembly back onto the side of the engine. So you're going to have to bolt it up to the side. There's a spacer and like a bolt right here. And keep in mind there's also going to be, for this type of engine, this funky looking bracket, which is going to go just like this. And one thing I forgot to mention is it might be a good idea if these 3 bolts, you leave them loose, because as you can tell, these 3 holes line up with those 3 bolts. And then the bolts go through that end. And this little hole right here near my pinky is going to get lined up with this bolt here. For the next step, we're going to be taking our flywheel and we're going to put it so the fins are facing up and slide it down over top, just like this. And then we're going to be taking that nut that we took off earlier, that looks like this, slide it over top, and just tighten it down by hand. We don't need to use a tool or anything to tighten this down. Next thing we're going to be installing is our spark plug stator armature combination. So this goes right in this area right here. There's 2 little bolts. And don't forget to put on your little governor flap, this little guy here as well. So you want to take it to this flap's facing down to the right, slide this part through, and then we're going to thread it through to the other end and tighten everything down. Okay, almost the second to last step would be the air filter. So we're going to take the air filter itself, which should be put together. And some of yours might not have an air filter, but most do. This little part that's kind of like cut off, you can kind of see it's not a perfect square, should be like facing towards the flywheel. Loosen it up, line it up, and the hardest part is trying to get it lined up. Finger tighten it, and then you're going to tighten it down with a screwdriver. The very last step is you're going to be putting your outer shroud cover and your pull start cover on. This part's kind of tricky because you have to get this part here lined up with the spline at the top. Like I said, some of your engines might be like this, some might not. We're going to take these bolts that were on, off, all around our engine, and there should be like maybe 2 or 3 of them. One thing to make note of, there's a small cutaway right here for the spark plug wire. That should be passing down through that area there. Let's take this, slide it on top. Sometimes you might have to pull the string a few times to get it close until it slides on just like that. Then we're going to finger tighten all of our bolts down before we tighten them down with a ratchet. Once you tighten your stuff down the whole way, you're completely done and your engine's back together. A couple things to make note of when you're completely done with your project. It'd be a good idea to have myself, Mr. Nicholas, come over and take a look at it just to check it off. And the second thing would be, you shouldn't have any extra bolts or screws or anything left over inside this manila container right here. If there's stuff left over, then that's when we have a problem and we should be putting stuff or like trying to find where it goes. The very last thing you guys will do is break out your inventory checklist, and you're going to go through your whole entire toolbox to make sure everything is back where it belongs and you didn't lose anything along the way. Make sure you check the top tray and the bottom tray as well. Once everything's checked out and I come over and I check it out myself, you can put everything away, snap the lid shut, and put everything back in its storage location in the back room. Last thing I want to mention, guys and girls, when you're going through this process, there's going to be some challenging parts. I encourage you to go through and troubleshoot and figure it out yourself. If something isn't working out right, try to take it upon yourself to figure it out before you give up and just sit there in class to do nothing. If it comes to like a final result and you cannot figure it out for whatever reason, then you can have me come over and I will be more than happy to help you out during class.